Good evening, everybody. I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered here in the ancestral territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Six Nations of the New Credit, and the Anishinaabe, the Six Nations of the Grand River, and the Anishinaabe, of the New Credit. It's an honor and privilege to be here today with my young guy, because really the decisions and the fight and the work that is happening in this room are going to be most felt, I think, by this generation I have here in my arms. I want to acknowledge Debbie for being here today, the Director of Transit, and taking time to come and hear from you folks directly. I also, just in setting that up, want to acknowledge the complexity of the political climate that we're in around transit. It is my opinion that for decades in this city, transit has been a conversation around class. And there was an old paradigm of homeowner, taxpayer, car driver versus renter, transit / freeloader. It's a false dichotomy. It is something that we need to really explore in meaningful ways. And I had somebody recently ask me about the bus lane debate that was here and the struggle around transit and what that meant in a very symbolic way. And I reminded them that we are trying to plan into the future, acknowledging the decades of inadequate funding, political support, and organizing. So here we are here tonight, by and large, due to the efforts of grassroots organizers, the leadership of Environment Hamilton, the incredible campaign by ATU, and just recognizing the work that they put in. And we're also here at a very interesting intersection with this idea of higher order transit and what that means to the city. I'm here today wearing my shirt. I know for some it's a controversial thing to talk about keeping public transit public, but for me, For me personally, as it relates to LRT, there are still some questions that are left unanswered with our exploration into this new relationship with Metrolinx. I am privileged of having information and conversations that not everybody in the general public has, and there are still some questions that for me that are left unanswered. But the one question I do have answered is that I have a vested interest in the growth and in the proper and adequate attention to HSR. I want to state explicitly, I believe in HSR. I believe that the problems to fix are political problems, not necessarily just policy problems. We put together an incredible 10-year transit strategy. We raised the fare on riders, and then we deferred the city's obligation for transit. So we're in these conversations around absenteeism, which really is pitting the public against our drivers. It's important to note why those things happen, and I'll close by acknowledging the work of Mr. Joey Coleman and the open data that he has provided that I wasn't even privy to in his consistent coverage of these issues, as well as the frontline drivers who are out there every day. The driver that I had on the bus today started at 6:30 and showed me on her screen a call for 4 missed services, which meant that she was being asked to stay on. That is not the fault of frontline drivers. That is So with that being said, I just want to thank Ian and Environment Hamilton and certainly everybody around this horseshoe and all of you for making it a priority to be here tonight. I didn't want to have to choose between spending a couple hours with my son and being here with you, so I just try to make both happen. But thank you for inviting me here today, and thank you for all your work.
All right. Thank you so much, Councillor. So moving forward, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. I'm not going to be up here for that long, but just to kind of point things out, I think most of you signed in. The purposes of that are twofold. One of them is in your interest, is so then that way we can follow up, send you email updates about what happened tonight and what's going on forward. Okay, that's fine. As well as you might have noticed that on those sheets, we had an option for you to check off that you want to become a member of Environment Hamilton. I just want to point out Environment Hamilton, our membership is completely free. And what that allows you to do is be a voting member within our organization. It allows you to come to our AGM and allows you to get more updates about the work that we're doing at Environment Hamilton beyond just this transit file. So this evening, we're starting off with myself, and then we're going to be moving on to Elaine from the Hamilton LRT Advocacy Group. Then we're going to have Sarah Mayo from the SPRC, Stephanie and Ryan from McMaster Student Union, Don McLean, who's a former Environment Hamilton co-founder and Hamilton 350 chapter member, then Sheldon from the local ATU, and then we're going to be finishing off with Dennis Guy from the HSR. And I do want to extend my thanks to Debbie as well for coming tonight to hear everyone's concerns, which is absolutely vital. I want to just say I'm extremely thankful that we not only have Labour and the HSR, but we also have Council coming here to all come together and talk about this issue that is extremely complicated. So before I leave, I just want to point out we're Environment Hamilton. We're concerned with climate change. Here in Hamilton, what we saw in 2015 was every single emission source within our city, this includes industry, has actually reduced emissions into the atmosphere, except for one source, and that was transportation. That might not be a surprise to a lot of folks in this room. Transportation is a key emission source in Ontario at large. But ultimately, what's important to point out is that it's only transportation that's growing in Hamilton as of late. You might have seen this. We published this online a few months ago. And so this is excluding industry sources. And this is just looking at the contributions that we make as Hamiltonians. And you'll see that transportation is the single largest source. And it takes up almost 50% of our contributions. However, when things get a little shocking, and you look at the numbers that the city has presented to Council, and Councillor Green might remember when he saw these for the first time, is that when you look at transportation, this isn't an issue of when we think about transportation in terms of heavy trucks, buses, things like that, but is rather entirely reliant on light road vehicles. 75% of all emissions from the transportation sector, which I will stress is the only rising source of greenhouse gas emissions in Hamilton, is from single occupant cars. If you want to look here, you'll see that buses are less than a percentage of our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. And ultimately what at Environment Hamilton we really believe in is that for us as a city to tackle climate change, we have to expand transit. And the way to do that is we're going to have a few different solutions and different answers from you guys after the presentations, but this is why Environment Hamilton is coming and talking about transit at our core message, because we are an environmentalist organization and climate change is being affected by our transportation choices. So without further ado, we're going to be moving on to the next speaker.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight and for inviting us over. My name is Anayash Bureau, and this is Mark Rejon. We're leads on the Hamilton LRT Resident Advocacy Group. Yes, there's a no LRT. To me, we're about yeses, and yes, we can do something. When I hear no, that means we're not moving forward, and we really haven't gone any further. So seeing no here is actually what we're fighting against. Certainly. I'm sorry, my throat is a little bit raw. So this morning I went to Our Future Hamilton. Communities in conversation, great engagement exercise, 55,000 people that were reached by online presentation workshops and what have you. A lot of engagement. In its infrastructure and built-in environment priorities, it notes key directions. The community has spoken often and always and had a very consistent message. Create a well-connected transportation network that allows people to get around for work, errands, shopping, education, and much more. Today, as we have last year and the year before, where I met many of the participants tonight, we talked about an urgent need to fix the HSR. That was 3 years ago. We agreed to increase fares in the past to allow more financial resources to be directed and fixing the inherent system problems that exist in the HSR and have so for much too long. At an almost crisis level, as Joey has demonstrated in the last few weeks, or almost an outright disaster state, we find ourselves today that we have yet to start to address the HSR service deficits and functional problems. We're far behind in the 10-year, as Matthew pointed out, the 10-year HSR plan. Worse yet, we find ourselves here today rehashing the same argumentation to City Council so that they may actually address the issues surrounding HSR services, or lack of. In the last weeks, the situation has gone from awful to downright bad and totally unacceptable, not only to transit users, promoters, and the system workers, but for all of the city. Regardless of such an effort, such as efforts like Amazon headquarters, we've put a lot of effort on this particular issue that popped up, but we're still not fixing our problems in our city, the ones that we know we've identified. To bid on Amazon, and I'm sorry if it seems like a misdirection, but to bid on Amazon can see very well what is happening in our city and our transit system. There's very much a disconnect between what we perceive we are and what we are doing with the system. There's a lot of different opinions on it. Our system is not up to standards. We have a council that has to be accountable to that. But yet, we perceive to believe that, or the council believes, that everything is fair in our land, and that's what they perceive is their reality. But it isn't the reality of the user. As transit users, they're dreaming. And they do not grasp the essential purposes of public transit as an economic engine, as an equalizer for all, students, seniors, vulnerable populations, or as an environmental asset. No, they still believe that transit users are lesser residents in our great city. The onus has and will always be on the other privileged transportation method, cars. We speak by experience. Look at the Hamilton LRT project. In its history and the long course it has taken to get to this point, decades, let's re-engage the same communities and all the stakeholders to fix the HSR. We were able to move forward a project that most perceived it as not for us, and we moved it forward gathering stakeholders that they've never been gathered. I think we need to do the same thing to fix the HSR. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, next up will be Sarah Mayo from the SPRC. Just by show of hands, if possible, was anyone here for Sarah's presentation last year? Okay, no, that's good that there's only a few of you, because Sarah's a fantastic researcher. I'm personally looking forward to this extensively because she brings a lot of data. Are you ready?
Yeah, I think
it should be up at the top. Okay, great.
Perfect. So for those, this is a repeat of, in February, I made most of this was presented to council, and but it's still relevant, but most of it has not yet been updated, in part because we don't have the updated data since then. So I'm just going to speak to some generational trends in driving and transit use. We've been talking a lot about sort of what was funding last year and this year, but what is the big picture? And then I'll talk about municipal funding, the good news, and then municipal funding's the gaps to fill, and why it says why transit in Hamilton is an incredibly effective investment.
You can use the mouse.
The mouse, click. Okay, so generational trends. Oops, yeah. I'm going to go not do that. Okay, so driving rates are decreasing in Hamilton. This is a trend seen across North America, but so this is Hamilton-specific data. Hamilton driving rates are decreasing among younger and middle-aged people, but increasing among older people. So in Hamilton, this data covers 1986 to 2011. Any day, we should be getting the 2016 data. If anyone here wants to help analyze the 2016 data, come and talk to me afterwards. And it's the number of auto driver trips per person. So how many driving trips were done by drivers, so not talking about passengers. And we see that for the younger age group, so under 40, there's a big decline from high of over 2.5 trips per day at age 40 to 44 to now much closer to 2. And then for 20-year-olds, there's only about 1 driver trip per day in Hamilton. The opposite is happening older age groups. Older people are becoming healthier, are more independent, and so their rates of driving are increasing tremendously. 80-year-olds used to drive at about 0.25 trips a day and are now almost at 1 driver trip per day. And so similarly, we see some generational trends in transit. Younger people are increasing their transit use, and middle-aged people, and older age groups are decreasing their transit use. When we talk about municipal funding, there's always some good news and some not so good news. And so the good news is that there is increasing funding in Hamilton even before the 10-year transit strategy started. So between 2013 and 2016, there was a 15.1% increase in municipal funding. There's been increases as well because the provincial gas tax gives operating funding for municipalities in Ontario to fund transit. But let's say we're just talking about property tax money, municipal money, 15.1% increase, although we have to take into account that inflation during that time was 5.4% and population growth was about 2.6%. So if we add up inflation and population growth, the municipal funding is still larger than those two combined, and so that's a good thing. And the other good thing that we're seeing, this is transit revenue. I don't think HSR has released their updated ridership numbers, but we see, at least in their sort of monthly report on transit revenue, we see quite a bit of growth this year. There had been some years where there was stable, there wasn't really the increases in transit fares revenue, and partially because, as we know, when transit fares increase, the revenue doesn't always increase because it deters a lot of riders. And so now there's a fare freeze, and it's not a perfect correlation, but we certainly see some pretty big increases in some months recently. But there's still gaps to fill. So transit funding has increased in Hamilton, but it's still quite low compared to others. So this is HSR municipal operating funding is lower than the average, so lower than Canadian mid-sized transit systems, lower than the GTHA average, and lower than Ontario municipal systems per capita, per number of taxpayers paying for the service. And the same thing for capital funding. And there is an argument to say, well, Hamilton has less wealth, although Toronto has a higher poverty rate than Hamilton, but Toronto is a bigger city, bigger system, and they have a much bigger tax base in terms of all the businesses there. And incomes are certainly lower than places like Halton in Hamilton. So we can't, it's not apples to apples. So this, so we have looked at it in terms of percentage of average income on municipal taxes for transit, and Hamilton is about middle of the pack, but even below average. So of the GTHA municipalities, about 0.4% of an average person's an average household's income goes to municipal taxes for transit, whereas in Hamilton it's 0.25%. Yet our transit ridership per capita kind of is above average, or right at average, including if we include the TTC in that average. So Hamilton has kind of, for the lower dollars it spends, gets quite a bit out of it. Which can show that basically there's kind of an untapped potential for increased investment here. Of course it's not working. Okay. And so property taxes is one concern when talking about increasing funding for HSR. But the other, the biggest, much bigger than property taxes for people who have a car is their car costs, right? And so that is a concern that can be alleviated by transit. Families can, young people can delay car ownership if transit is good. Parents can get by with one car instead of two. Older people can rely on car sharing and transit and not have to have a car for as long, because it's about an average of 28% of people's after-tax income goes to car ownership in Hamilton. If we use the CAA's kind of numbers for how much a small car costs. And that's a very significant amount of income. So there's ways we can decrease people's disposable income by increasing funding for transit. And so this is, lastly, kind of just going back on how HSR is an incredibly effective investment. Because we get more bang for our buck in a way, I think that's sort of why there's such an appetite for transit in Hamilton. People feel like this is the built environment really, a lot of Hamilton is built in a way that transit can serve effectively, but the buses just don't come as frequently as you might expect. And so this is, despite lower funding, HSR is the second most transit enthusiastic city in the GTHA. This was, in 2015, the orange line, how many passengers per transit vehicle per day. So how full our buses were? Our buses were second fullest after the TTC, which includes the subway and the streetcars. So our money is going towards, to riders that are there, that are untapped, that want more ridership. Unlike other cities where they're still kind of developing it because they have much more of sort of car-centric culture than a city like Hamilton. Thank you.
So moving along. I believe it was you, Dawn, or was it Stephanie? I think it was Stephanie. Or was it you, Dawn? Who's next? Yes. You guys ready?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Deshpande. I am the Vice President Education of the McMaster Students Union.
And I'm Stephanie. I am the Associate Vice President of the McMaster Student Union for Municipal Affairs, and I hold a new position in the MSU, and it's one that was specifically created because of the need for more advocacy in the city of Hamilton. And the reality is all of us are being failed by our current city when it comes to issues regarding transit. So as students, we rely heavily on transit. Many of our students are commuters from the GTA and rely on GO Transit, but most of them live in Hamilton and rely on the HSR. Transit services serve as a vital connection between Hamilton and McMaster. It connects us to shopping districts, our places of work, and everywhere else we need to go. So it's very vital in helping students connect to their community and hopefully inspiring us to start our lives here even after we graduate. And these benefits will only grow with increased investment in our buses.
So I'll just give you some numbers. Undergraduate students at McMaster contribute $4.6 million annually to the HSR. Last year, we voted to increase our annual fee for extra service to $188. That's a $30 jump from the previous year. This is nearly 15% of the HSR's total revenue, yet we're often the first to be targeted with cuts. The 51, so regarding that referendum to increase our fee, thousands of students overwhelmingly voted in support of increasing it. There was literally no debate to increasing it because people value the HSR, they value transit at McMaster. And this is only the undergraduates. The graduate students also pay into the HSR. So the 51 University line is often cut first. Recently, I remember seeing an article where 4 buses in one morning were canceled, causing many students and staff to be late to their classes, work, and other commitments. If students are seen as an easy target, that's one thing, but what is not realized is that the 51 is also heavily used by non-student community members who want to get home or to work. And then this is not taking into account other bus cancellations across the city or how Mohawk students might also be impacted further.
Problems with the HSR are not new to us. Even before this bus cancellation crisis, buses going to McMaster are always overfilled, with sometimes 2 to 3 buses passing by students and community members of Westdale and downtown before one is free enough to get on. So this overcrowding is also an accessibility issue. The HSR is supposedly accessible, but if there's a packed bus that can't accommodate individuals with mobility devices, it truly isn't. So a commute from the mountain to McMaster can be anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour. I live on the East Mountain, and it takes me approximately an hour to get to McMaster. And because of that, I've had to switch over to driving just for convenience. But that's obviously a privilege that I have that many students don't have. A lot of us, the mountain and amalgamated parts of Hamilton are not properly served by the HSR. We have a lot of students that are low income, who are international students, and who are working students. So the HSR is often the only option for many of us.
Yeah. So we all are quite frustrated with lack of bus service on weekends. In particular, we also see cuts to our bus service in the summer, even though we pay extra for a full year summer bus pass, and we have done so for the last 4 years. Moving forward, we want the city to make substantial improvements and investments into the HSR system. Hiring 58 bus drivers is really just the start on this larger problem of a lack of funding. And as students, we don't want to be on the front line of cuts. In fact, we have continuously paid for additional service, which we're not necessarily getting because of these cuts. We would like our contribution to the HSR to be valued. And more than that, we want every rider to get the HSR service they deserve from every part of the city. Finally, we want the city to get back on track with the 10-year transit strategy and provide Hamiltonians with the service that they need. We are really proud to support Environment Hamilton's Fix the HSR campaign as students and residents of this incredible city. Thank you.
Next up is Don McLean. As I said, he's a co-founder of Environment Hamilton.
Do you want to give yourself a little bit of an introduction while
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the funding for the HSR and a rather weird system that operates in Hamilton in terms of how we're taxed to provide for funding for the HSR. Let's see where this goes. Which button moves it forward?
Or on the keyboard, just try that.
Nothing's moving here. Okay, so the system in Hamilton is generally called area rating, and what it means is that people in the old city pay far more in taxes for transit than people in the former suburbs, despite the fact that we've been one city for 17 years. In the suburban areas, the taxation rate is a little less than a third of what it is in the city of Hamilton. This doesn't affect somebody riding the bus. Anybody riding the bus from any part of the city pays the same fare, but it affects who's carrying the load financially for the transit system. So this is Grays Road in Stony Creek and Hamilton. Hamilton on one side, Stony Creek on the other side. One of these homes pays 3 times the amount of tax for transit than the other one. And of course, it's the Hamilton one that pays more. And I've got a circle there showing this is right at a bus stop. The bus service for both of these homes is identical. The transit system runs up and down. It's not great, but it is there for both homes, but one pays 3 times as much. So what's the implication of area rating for transit and this completely unfair system? And I should say that we asked staff a number of years ago to try to find out if anybody else in the province has anything like this. And the answer came back, no. There are no other municipalities which charge some parts of the urban area far more for transit taxes than other parts of the urban area. There are places that charge less for rural, and in Hamilton we don't charge any for rural, but there are no places that have the bizarre system that Hamilton has. So what this means is a number of different things. One of it is that if a suburban area wants to increase its transit service, the entire cost of that increase is borne by the residents of that suburb. Whether they get the service or not, whether it's in their area or not, it's not shared across the city, it's entirely on that suburb. So a couple of years ago, Binbrook tried out Transcab service at a cost of $225,000 a year. They voted overwhelmingly to not continue that service because it would have cost them $88 per household to keep that $225,000 service enhancement to Binbrook. If you did this across the whole city, the impact on a Hamilton household would be a couple of dollars. Again, a couple of years ago, the RIMO 44, which runs right across the city from Ancaster, across the mountain, down into Stony Creek and ends at Eastgate. A change of improving the service from 30 minutes to 20 minutes was blocked because it was going to cost Ancaster taxpayers a few more dollars. So everybody lost out on that. And the less HSR funding as a result of this taxation system, a whole section of the city, generally the wealthiest section of the city, the Ancasters and Flamboroughs, pay far less, and we end up with less funding overall for our transit system. And as Ian has already pointed out, if we want to deal with climate and we want to deal with emissions, this is the picture in 2012 for Ontario emissions, where the largest portion is transportation. And in Hamilton, the numbers are similar that they've just come out with. And in terms of the municipal contribution per person, I'm not entirely in agreement with Sarah's calculation that it went up 15% in 2015. In fact, when I looked at it, our numbers were still by far the lowest at 2.9% over the years 2006 to 2015. Nobody was that low on a percent per year increase in municipal contribution, and that's really the inflation rate and not much more. So if I can leave it there, but essentially there's lots of money available that's not being tapped into because we have a bizarre system left over from pre-amalgamation.
Next up, we're going to have Sheldon from the ATU 107.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank Ian for inviting the ATU Local 107 to this. I think this is already progress. We were wondering, let's get transit moving and forward. Well, I think the union showing up here shows an indication that we're listening and we're ready to move forward. To start with, we need to get back on track with the 10-year plan. That's a must. We have to get back on the 10-year plan. We're already falling behind, and when you fall behind, that costs more money to catch up. So we need to get back on track with that. Also, a growing transit is a growing community. This community is growing far faster than this transit is growing, which also is costing more money to catch up because we're always playing the catch-up game. For example, I'm aware of Riverdale, which is an area of Hamilton that is screaming for transit. They want it. They're not even saying, we don't want it, they want it, and we're not there. We're not providing it there. Binbrook was just mentioned now. Again, the area rating issue, which I'm sure will be mentioned. Again, I'm convinced they would want transit. It needs to be proposed to them in a much better way than it was the first time around. Grimsby is growing. I live in Caledonia. I don't know if anybody read the article there about a week or two ago. This isn't even part of Hamilton, and they're interested in getting transit out to them. But how do we do this kind of stuff unless we get on track? We need to, this is great, and ATU is glad to be here, but it's time to really get this thing going here. Again, for McMaster, I know at one point there was talk about a shuttle HSR service from the Javinsky Hospital to McMaster, because employees want to get back and forth quick, and they don't want to be there in an hour. They want to be able to get on there and get down there for about 20 minutes. Again, these are not rocket science. I know we're always talking about money, and the budget's not there, this and that. This HSR is yours. It belongs to you. We can't always just talk about the money's not there. It gets more and more expensive if we are not growing with the city. Also, I'd like to mention community. Transit is part of the community. We have to adapt with the community. We have Festival of Friends. It's your festival. We have Rib Fest. We have the night crawl on James Street. And we hardly offer any extra service during those times, which is linking communities together, these events. We're flying by the seat of our pants during these events. 2 or 3 hours into a festival, we might throw out an extra shuttle bus to help out. When the Festival of Friends comes, we know it comes the same time pretty much every year. Why are we scrambling on if we need buses or not? It should be a guaranteed. Festival of Friends, we're gonna have an extra 3 buses to help out on the routes to keep the strong transit that we should have. A robust transit system will be the ultimate success for the LRT. If the HSR is robust and booming, that means we're putting people on our buses and we're bringing them to a train that'll carry the people along. If you have a failing system of transit, I am telling you, the LRT will just run back and forth as empty. It's one. We're a team. We have to move forward together on these issues. I think we have to keep transit public. I have to mention it because if we keep transit public, we get to do this tonight. If it's privatized, we're not having this conversation. So let's keep transit public so we can have these conversations, and transit will always be in our hands. Thank you very much.
I'm blown away that we're on time right now. So finally, before we move on to the question and answering period for the speakers, we have Dennis Guy from the HSR, and I'm going to pull up your presentation right now, Dennis.
While Ian's pulling that up, something that you guys said reminded me, you were talking about a referendum that recently occurred to vote for increased fees for the HSR with the McMaster students. And 20 some odd years ago, I remember voting in a referendum at MAC that was whether or not HSR should be included in our student fees at all because we weren't paying for it. And what reminded me is that at that point in time, I voted yes. And so tonight to come back, like I said, 20 some odd years later, and to work for the corporation itself, here I am again voting yes. So, Ellen, you mentioned Our Future Hamilton. Anybody else here at the Our Future Hamilton Summit this morning? Anybody? Yeah, pretty good turnout. So I was there as well, and the energy in the room of these passionate folks that were all about Hamilton and the great things happening in Hamilton. And there was a video that was played, it's something really caught my attention that I thought related to tonight, and it was, I might pronounce his name wrong, but Rob Zedler from the Cotton Factory. And he said, the energy in Hamilton right now is not about what has occurred, but what could occur. Not about what has occurred, but what could occur. And you know, it has stuck with me throughout the day and helped me to reflect on why we're here tonight. We can look at the past with cynicism, we can poke holes in it, and we can make fun of a statement like transit, your first choice. But that means we're looking backward. To some extent, we should learn from the past. But buses don't have rear view mirrors. They're not designed for backing up. They have huge front windshields. so that we can see where you want to go. Tonight is about looking through that front windshield, about sharing what a fixed HSR looks like to you. Because if there's something we could all agree on before we begin our conversation tonight, I would say that we all want a transit system where people make transit their first choice. My name is Dennis Guy, and I'm the Manager of Customer Experience and Innovation for the city's Transit Division. You could ask me, what does that mean? If you took a look at my LinkedIn profile, you'd see that I've written bringing voice of customer to service design. My role here tonight is to listen closely to what you have to say, to ask you questions, and to look for themes that emerge so that as an organization, HSR can move towards a more customer-focused service. Ian asked me if I could talk about the 10-year local transit strategy and where we're at in that strategy today. So then what exactly is the 10-year strategy? It was developed to action the recommendations from Rapid Ready, which was a strategy to prepare Hamilton for rapid transportation. Rapid Ready recommends two key things. One, to provide more hours of service, and two, to reconfigure the network to prepare for rapid transit. So following Council's adoption of that Rapid Ready, they directed staff to report back in time for the 2015 budget process on a 10-year local transit strategy. So hence the strategy was born. And it's based on 5 concepts to build on existing service. Refining the customer experience, addressing system deficiencies, revising the service standards, adding capacity, and adding rapid transit corridors. Years 1 and 2, which were 2015 and 2016 respectively, were about fixing system deficiencies. As most, if not all of you already know, we've been working on deficiencies such as frequency. So this is the time between buses, the time that you would have to wait for the next one. Running time, the time that an operator has to get from one end of the line to the other. Recovery time, the time that an operator has on each end in order to keep the running time on time. And then route structure, the design of routes, a package of routes, to balance customer needs with an efficient system. Year 3 of the strategy focuses on updating standards that haven't been updated since amalgamation. Service standards include coverage, which would be the geographic reach of the service span, the hours of the day that we operate, frequency, which I mentioned is the time between buses, productivity, how many people are getting on a bus on a particular route per hour, and then loading, what's the percentage of the seats that are filled. Years 4 through 10 are focused on growth, adding capacity and growing ridership. Things like expanding service coverage to growth areas, expanding frequency and span to meet demand, increasing corridor capacity, improving the connections to outer communities and other regional forms of transportation and other modes of transportation, and then developing the BLAST network. So, where are we at so far? During the first 2 years of the strategy, years 1 and 2 in 2015 and 2016, we've added more than 66,000 service hours. We've added more than $6 million to the operating budget, 50 employees, and 25 buses. Year 3 was deferred to 2018 during the 2017 budget process. And Council will begin to look at this again during the 2018 budget process, which will happen over the coming months. In the meantime, or within this time frame, in addition to the year 1 and year 2 investments, we're taking advantage of the federal government's Public Transit Infrastructure Fund, or affectionately known as PTIF, to carry out 14 projects valued at $72 million. The advantage to Hamilton is that we only pay half of that, so we're essentially doubling our money. And the projects include, and I'm not going to list them all tonight, but designing a new maintenance and storage facility, buses, shelter replacements, automated passenger counts, a mobile application, Wi-Fi on buses, and new garage doors. With these projects, keep in mind that the major financial investment that's being made, we need to also keep in mind that money is being spent on building not necessarily maintaining. So if we look at this with the analogy of building a house, the federal funding allows us to put down the foundation, the walls, and the roof. But once we move in, we'll have to start paying for the heating and the lighting and the upkeep and the replacement. In conjunction with an organizational restructure a few months ago that Debbie made, which I'll talk about on the next slide, we published our strategic direction and 3 key goals for transit: to consistently provide a customer experience that meets or exceeds.
When are you going to get to absenteeism? When are you going to get to drivers' rude behavior? You know, 5 years ago, I got on the bus, I answered my phone, and the bus driver said to me, "Oh yeah, you know, we wait for you till you sit down." And I said, "My daughter's in the hospital." She said, "Who the fuck cares if your daughter's dying?"
So I'm sorry for your experience that you had, certainly on our service.
A year ago, September, I was running for a York bus, and my grandson's head slipped out of my head, and the bus driver pulled up because he loves to play the game, "Catch me if you can." And he pulled out on an angle where a car couldn't get through, but somebody on one of those really fast bikes could have knocked my grandson right out in the middle of the street. And this is a veteran driver.
So if I
gotta get to this and scribble on the bullshit.
If I could ask you if we could maybe take this conversation after the meeting and have it outside in the hall.
We're going to have an opportunity for everyone to speak with the presenters after we do a public question period. I'm sorry for your experience, but we're going to have to move forward with the presentations for now. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Ian. So 3 goals that we have as the transit division. The first one, I think I already mentioned, but to consistently provide a customer experience that meets or exceeds the expectation of current customers, while at the same time building a reputation that attracts new customers. To maintain the transit service and infrastructure that keeps our system in a good state of repair, and also taking ownership of this system that increases the modal split through growth within current conditions and expansion to meet future needs. To set ourselves up for a more customer-focused approach to how we manage the system, our director, Debbie Delvedo, who's with us tonight, put together a new organizational structure that has a section dedicated to the customer experience. And the focus here is marketing, communication, public consultation, social media, customer service, and information technology. So there's one more thing that I'd like to finish with tonight, but before I do want to say thank you. Certainly thank you for all of you who have come out tonight. This is a great turnout. It's a great input for us as the ones at the city who are responsible for making these changes. Thank you to Ian and the Environment Hamilton team for having us. Thank you to my other presenters, who some of them seem to have abandoned the chairs at the moment, but are here with us tonight. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say and continuing this conversation tonight. I came here to listen, and Debbie came here to listen, to better understand what does fix the HSR mean to you? To learn what a fixed HSR could look like. To meet you face-to-face, in person, to begin creating a better customer experience when you're riding on an HSR bus. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. As I said, this will be the portion for public questions. However, some of our presenters have stepped out. I do want to just clarify something. As Environment Hamilton, as the folks who put on this meeting, it became really clear that something had to be done in regards to the massive amount of missed buses that we saw. I want to make just one thing really clear that I made clear to both Dennis and Sheldon, and Dennis and Sheldon both agreed with me when we were talking about this, is that the issue of the absenteeism issue, from my perspective, is an issue between the employer and employee. This isn't an issue that, it affects us riders, but this isn't an issue that this form is for the purpose of weighing in on. I know that that might be disappointing to some folks here, but I thought it was incredibly vital that we had someone from council, that we had someone from the HSR, that we had someone from the ATU to come together and start responding to chronic issues that we've been seeing beyond just missed buses in October, missed buses in September, issues of the 51 being delayed. And so what I want to do just for this first little bit is I want to invite everyone is if you have any specific issues that you have with the HSR system, if there are any routes that we see as particularly problematic or particularly good is also a good thing to go by as well. And ultimately what I hope to really accomplish from this is to not only have us at Environment Hamilton have a better idea of how we can do our jobs better working on the transit file, but also so that way folks like Dennis and Debbie have a better idea of how going forward what the HSR can be done to do better. So does anyone have any initial questions or comments?
Yeah, can we make mountain service better in the morning so that I can get to go and get to Toronto in time? Because we have to wait 20 minutes or I don't know what it is out in the freezing cold in winter to get to the GO system. I'm a staunch environmentalist, so I do it. But if it could be better, we would get more riders. And there's no parking around the downtown GO. There is a bit of parking at the West Harbor GO, but servicing the GO at rush hour for us, rush hour to get to Toronto is a couple hours and rush hour in Toronto.
Anyone else?
Sorry, if I could just ask
definitely.
one question of clarification there. Any particular area of the mountain that you're coming from?
Well, I'm on the 22 or the 41.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I can tell you a specific incident today, but instead it's the general problem of a small number of HSR drivers that treat people in wheelchairs like second class. And over and over, I stood at the front of a bus stop on Barton at King and James, and the driver wouldn't load me because I wasn't at the back of the bus shelter. Like, how do I tell the driver? And this is the situation which I plan to address with customer service tomorrow morning. I got the bus driver's number, and I got the time. And when we had Don Hall here before, I used to send direct messages as they happened. And that's maybe what we need to do more of, is get a direct message to right up to the top so they can see it, because when it got to Don Hall, it went downstairs and it happened. And I heard about it after too. But people, DARTS is a wonderful service, but it can't do all the service. We've been advertising on our buses for years, wheelchair accessible. But that doesn't mean, for example, the buses are loaded. Oh, really? Go to the back of the bus and it's empty. And the sign does say, these seats must, not may, not maybe, must be vacated. But the drivers say, that doesn't mean anything. And that's the psychology you have of your bus drivers. And that's a big problem. And I know I'm not alone.
Sheldon's gonna respond.
I apologize for your encounter with bus drivers in that manner. I'd like to also indicate that the system is stressed, as you probably would realize. There is a scramble to keep things going, and we're trying. The drivers care about the job, and they care about your situation as well. But we need to grow transit. Like I was saying before, a robust system gives you the time to take care of things properly and correctly. Right now, a driver hasn't even got a time to think. He's got to go, he's got to go, he's got to go. Meeting schedules some of these schedules that were created in 1989, when our buses were high floor buses, weren't even lowered to let wheelchairs on. Not even updated yet until we're currently working on that now. We have to grow. For example, let's put it this way. We have a Costco that was just built out there on the east end of Fruitland. This big, huge store. There's not even a bus going out there. And they're about to develop tons of stores out there. It's going to be like a new Meadowlands. And we're not growing out there. We need that vision. We need to grow with the city. We need to have adequate enough buses on the routes, so when you want to get on the bus, you can get on the bus, no problems there. So that driver has the chance to get out of his seat, give you a hello, get you on that bus properly, make sure you're fastened in, ask you where you're going to go, then the driver can sit in his seat and drive and get you off properly and correctly without the driver feeling stressed and without you feeling stressed. That might not be the full solution, but that's a start. I have no doubt that we need to do a lot of improving.
The driver attitude of a small few. Not most of them are excellent drivers.
I understand that.
Small few, because the next bus that I got on, the driver said, yeah, she dumps people all the time.
Follow up to your question, though. You said that you used to be able to make a complaint or voice a concern to the HSR, or at least to customer service, and then you would get feedback back on how that was followed through.
Get feedback.
Well,
Feedback from bus drivers who didn't like to be reported on.
okay, so, but would you appreciate it more if you were to go to customer service and you would make a complaint like that, and you would know that something was done about it, or you would like some follow-up on that?
Yeah, let's start with customer service. Am I correct? Customer service goes for months between 12 and 1 and nobody's there? That's what,
So that may have been a practice of the past. We now have coverage for that time of day.
okay, not for a long time it wasn't.
Okay, moving on. Sorry, I see a number of folks. I'm going to go with the person who I saw put up their hand first. You in the green pants. I'm not wearing my glasses, so I'm slightly colorblind. I'm sorry. Yes, you. Yeah.
Just a point on the scheduling issue that you brought up. I noticed that drivers are a bit stressed in terms of they don't even have enough time to stop for a bathroom break without making the bus late for the passengers. That's happened to me recently. But that wasn't my original point. My original point was I think we need better service overall on the mountain. And one of the routes that I'm on, my main route is the 34. For example, on Sundays, it only runs once an hour, which I think is totally ridiculous. If you want to go downtown on a Sunday, it's only once an hour, and you can only come back once an hour. And there isn't even any service on the 16th in Ancaster on Sunday at all. So I think that somehow some of this service needs to be addressed.
Ian, if I'm
Going to move on.
Wait, can I answer?
Yes, just as the gentleman's coming up, I think he wants to speak into the mic. So yeah, please answer.
First of all, you're correct. There is stress.
From here, as opposed to from here.
You are correct. There is stress with the drivers. I'll use myself as an example. It's not uncommon for me to have to drive a bus up to 10 hours and not get out of my seat. 10 hours. We're being asked to work 68 hours a week. We said okay to this because we do care about the customers. We're aware that winter is coming and that it's going to get cold. But 68 hours is not the solution for transit. You cannot run transit based on overtime. We need to grow transit. We need to have a vision. I mean, to deplete the employees isn't going to help improve transit. It doesn't help improve transit at all.
Yeah, sure.
Just one more thing on those comments. When you started out, you had mentioned better service. As you kept commenting, it sounds like to you better service is increased frequency, that the buses would come more often on the particular routes that you mentioned.
Right.
Okay.
And, there is zero service on 16 on Sundays, and I think that's inadequate.
Okay, thank you.
Great, sir.
Hi, everyone. First, I have to say, I do not intend to offend or implicate any derogatory. That said, I take the bus every day. Okay? Having said that, Frank Cook, what he hears now in this chamber comes out of the grave. HSR ran extremely efficiently. That is a record, a challenge. Having said that, Councillor Matthew Green said one word policy. And the subsequent speaker said funding. And McMaster student touched two things, that is scheduling, taxes. And of course, our veteran, Don McLean, touched area rating. I'm not interested in any of those things. Customer service, with all due respect to you, sir, I'm a wrong guy. I know in and out of all these things, budget, everything. No comment. Having said that, I know director of bus service is here. How often that directress takes the bus and talks to the bus driver? Half the time, Presto card doesn't work. And half the time, the transfer tickets doesn't work. Those are the facts. And other thing I have to tell you, there is no funding problem. I know from the 2002 to 2016, I have analyzed. I know where the funding is. You got a commitment. Case in point, one has to differentiate between two budgets, current operating budget and capital budget. Your provision comes out of the current budget. Why do you do capital budgeting, forecasting 50 years? You need that much money. It's a scare tactics to the public. And area rating, I don't want to touch those things. And the staff report comes to the council. Council members are in dark. They don't know what the hell you people are saying. If you take the sentences right out of your report, structure of sentences are so ambiguous. As an intellectual person, I find it very regrettable. That's all I have to say.
Ian, we have some questions on this side as well.
Yes,
Yeah,
Ian, could you create a list maybe of people with their hands up?
I just want to go to one person who's had their hand up for quite a while, then I'll move over to this side, and then I'm going to move over to Sarah. But first, the gentleman in the hat who's had your hand up for quite a while.
I live along the Jolly Cut, and there is, at the set of lights, the last set of lights on the Jolly Cut, there's a bus stop. And a lot of times what happens is, especially during rush hour, a lot of buses tend to stop after the set of lights, either while I'm waiting at the bus stop or when I'm on the bus stop itself. I've lived in one of those buildings along the Jolly Cut since 2013, and I've been emailing my city councillor, Jason Farr, for years since it's happened, and he's been sending my email along to HSR. I've been advised by Councillor Farr to send pictures of when it happens. I've been advised to send dates, times, description of what the bus drivers look like, the bus number, and finally I got an answer back to me and was told that bus drivers are allowed to stop within so many meters before the stop or so many meters after the stop. And when you're standing at the bus stop, and by the way, I want to say, when I've asked bus drivers why they do that, they say that they're afraid that if they let passengers off the bus before the set of lights where the stop is, they're afraid that someone's going to hit like the button to cross and it's going to hold up the bus. So I've asked Councillor Farr and I've asked HSR if they can move the bus stop over one post past the set of lights, because what happens is there's a lot of people, a lot of passengers who live in my apartment building with walkers and wheelchairs and canes, and what happens is, first of all, when you're on the bus, you think that the driver's forgotten to stop, but second of all, if I have a suitcase or a heavy bag or something, I'm running, and then the bus driver's telling me, well, you're holding me up. I don't think a bus stop should just be a suggestion as to where the bus should be stopping. It should be a defined place, and I get that on the Jolly Cut that there can sometimes be a backup, but I've looked on the HSR website and the City of Hamilton website, and I've seen nothing to say that bus stops are just that the bus driver can stop within so many meters before or after. It's not just a mere suggestion, it's where it should be stopping. And I get that sometimes if there's a long lane of buses that bus drivers, might want to, give room to other drivers. but it's so hard because you don't know, do I stand at the stop today or do I stop at the next post? I don't know what the solution is, but we all need to, it seems like everywhere else in the city, I can get, stand at the designated bus stop and a bus stops there, but on the Jolly Cut, it's a gamble every day as to where it is at the buses. Yeah, where it is as to where the bus is going to...
Sorry to interrupt. Just moving forward, does anyone else find this issue? Because this is something new to me that I didn't know that bus drivers are technically allowed to stop within a certain amount. Is it like, if anyone just wants show of hands, is this something that they've experienced at different bus stops? Okay, so there's a number. Sheldon, if you wanted to speak to that.
So again, I'll reiterate, it's a scheduling issue, inadequate scheduling, so the bus driver feels pressure to try to stay on schedule. So it can also be referred to in transit terms as somewhat of a pass-by. So what's happening, I know the stop you're talking about, is the bus will go past that to avoid the light because there's no time for that driver to catch up time anymore. Because again, we're dealing with schedules that are rather old.
Then move the stop. I've asked HSR a million times.
I don't know what, that I don't know why, but I'm just explaining to you why that's happening.
The sidewalk is a little lower, and sometimes it's hard for me to get off the bus when he puts this too far.
I can pass this on to the director. I'll talk to her tomorrow. I think this is an easy fix. Well, I can tell you I'll talk to her tomorrow. And
they move the stop after the stoplight, I'll be happy. I've been asking for it for 4 years. I'm told it's a big deal.
It's not a big deal. I know where the stop is, and this can be corrected.
Move past the stoplights, I'll shut up.
Okay, moving on. We're actually going to take, if everyone can keep their questions a little short, I just want to make sure folks get a chance to get their questions in who want to ask. Again, all the presenters have agreed to stick around after this portion's done, so if you have any specific questions, definitely go up. I'm just going to go up and I'm going to pick up 3 questions. And we're just going to move forward. If you can keep your questions a little concise just so we can do all 3 at once and then we can handle them afterwards. Who is the first person over here? Yes? Okay.
I guess mine are really suggestions more than so much a question in regards to what does fixed HSR mean. My first one would be to have all counselors and HSR employees ride the HSR to from work for about a month, just to give them a sense of what the system is like and what the deficiencies and inefficiencies are in the system. If you don't ride it, you don't know. All you hear is from passengers and you kind of fluff it off. But if you're actually taking transit, because I've taken it for the last 5 years and I've had recently to get a car for a job out of town. So I think that's one suggestion, and it's very easy to do for those counselors and employees that live in Hamilton. Another issue, suggestion I'd like to make is for the 1A and or B line bus to extend service beyond 7 p.m. All the way from Eastgate to McMaster, at least until the LRT is up and running. It's very inconvenient when you're heading past downtown, heading towards Eastgate, and you have to walk a block and a half, 2 blocks just to get to the GO station. It's not convenient for everybody, and it's ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. Another issue with buses being full, I've been on buses multiple times, and I'll say that majority of the drivers that I've had have been fantastic. There have been a few that have been, anyways, but I do find sometimes that drivers don't always encourage passengers to occupy seats, and subsequently the driver will look back in the mirror and say, we're full, and drive past the stop, and meanwhile there's 5, 6, 10 seats even at the back of the bus. I think allowing them to encourage them to say, you control the bus, take control of the bus, it's your bus, and encourage passengers to move back. And lastly, for the safety of the drivers, for crying out loud, schedule breaks for them, because if you're going to give them 60-hour work weeks and they're having to stop and we're late because they have to take a bathroom break or for get a drink, I think it's better to extend the time that they're on the bus and give them scheduled breaks.
Great.
And that's all I'm going to say.
And then moving on, sir, you had a question or
Yes, I have a comment. It's not asking for a response at this point, but on July 27th, I wrote a letter to Madam Director of the HSR with a concern I have. I hand-delivered it to her office in person on July 28th. That's 110 days ago, and Madam Director decided that I was not worthy of a response. I reject her lack of professionalism and how she is operating the HSR. Thank you.
Okay, moving on. In the green scarf, I believe it's green? Okay.
I have a question, but also I'd like to respond to an earlier comment around wheelchair access, other mobility devices. It's just really to let you know that the city does have a subcommittee for persons with disability. It has several working groups, one of which is on transportation. And I want to say that we have worked very hard with members of the HSR DARTS, ATS, and with HSR in particular, we have managed to make some really significant improvements for those with disabilities. One thing that we are concerned about is the complaint process. So that subcommittee deals with human rights and disability legislation at the provincial level that the municipality must adhere to. So it is an important subcommittee for the city, does good work, and it is a tool for citizens to make use of. So again, we are looking at the complaints process.
Thank you so much. So we're going to take some answers from those. Dawn, did you have anything to say? Okay. Sheldon?
I'll start with the First Lady here. I'm in favor. I actually drive the B-line in the morning. Yes, the B-line should go longer during the work week. And I'll even throw you one more. I think the B-line should be running on Saturdays too. Which was in the plans at one point. And as far as the wonderful woman that brought the disability issues, I noticed you mentioned, feel free to contact the ATU. We'd like to be involved with the process of helping as well.
Am I allowed to make secondary speech?
We're going to go to folks who haven't made a comment quite yet, because we do have a number of hands up on this side of the room. I'm going to go with Sarah first. Okay. Yes. Oh, yeah.
You are giving us the opportunity to respond to the first couple questions. So, two things I'd like to mention. The first is, credit to Debbie, because one of the things she challenges her management team with is to ride the bus and to spend time riding the bus that's not to and from something, so that it's all about that experience of being on the bus and not just I'm in a rush to get somewhere. So while it may not be back and forth to work every day for a month, it is something that she has challenged us with. And secondly, on the ACPD Transportation Working Group, I happen to attend that on a regular basis, and it's a great group for us to work with. Last night we were out, Debbie and I, at the Metrolinx AODA session, and we had quite a few members of the community, some on our transportation working group and some not, do something very similar to what we're doing right here, and we were able to take a whack of feedback in so that we can make improvements moving forward.
Okay, ready guys?
So, thanks for letting me talk. I'll try not to talk too much, but one of the things I wanted to mention is I've gotten the privilege of traveling a lot this year, and one of the things I've noticed is Hamilton actually has one of the most accessible municipal sort of transit systems that I've seen. So I'm very, very proud to be a Hamiltonian in that way. I think some of the issues that I've experienced is just like what my neighbor here said today about buses driving off. Sometimes buses, even when they're not full, will look at the wheelchair or the walker and just continue to drive off. I've had situations myself in my walker on the HSR where sometimes drivers will start to drive before I've actually sit down. So I've actually fallen on the HSR before. And a lot of issues in that way. I don't think it's intentional, and I do think that HSR bus drivers are very stressed and overworked. And I think one of the things the city should be doing is offering more adequate training with regard to accessibility and disability justice, especially because Hamilton has the highest population of people with disabilities in the province. That needs to be a better lens that's integrated throughout all of our transit systems here in this city. And I don't currently see that as a complete priority. I've seen multiple people fall down or get hurt just because of inconsistent behavior. And and I think you want to say something?
Yeah, I just have a question to say. Or like, I guess, sort of, should I?
Yeah, if you want, yeah, sure.
I am humble, so. I guess I have like one quick question.
And we're asking, what does fix the HSR mean? But I'm asking, who's the HSR for? There have been many cases that I've seen buses just drive past Syrian newcomers and Somali newcomers. I've been taking transit all my life, and my mother is a Somali Muslim immigrant woman, and I've seen her experience a huge amount of hate crimes and violence on the buses, and there's no accountability from the HSR or any sort of appropriate way to file a report, or if anything, makes it harder for racialized people to file a report without involving the police. I've seen a number of Somali newcomer families being drove past intentionally, and when I would ask the bus drivers why they would do that, they would just roll their eyes or say a lot of disgusting garbage. So who's allowed to feel safe on the HSR? Who is the HSR for? Also, with respect to hate crimes, I've seen a number of swastikas and hate crime, violent language on the buses. I've seen things like kill all Muslims on the bus. And when I would go and report or ask the bus drivers to do something about it, there's no sort of repercussion or protocol. So I think that also needs to be addressed when we're talking about fixing the HSR. Thank you.
And then I saw one more hand up. I think it was you. Yes.
I feel really silly mentioning this now because it's not to that kind of level of importance. But I too have been taking the HSR my whole life, and a number of my concerns have already been voiced. The one thing I'd like to say now is just to question temperature control on buses, because often in the summer it's way too cold, they have the AC blasting, and then it's the opposite depending on the season, and it's they've had the heat on way too early this year, and a lot of the times I've actually mentioned it to a couple of bus drivers at times where it's okay, it's late at night now, I think you can turn the AC off, I'm freezing back here. And it's more attuned to the comfort of the bus driver. And that's cool too. Of course, if they're on the bus all day long, of course they need to be comfortable. But I'm just wondering if it could be more regulated.
Ian, if I may.
No, yeah, so we had those three questions, if anyone wants to respond to them. And then I also just want to point out that we did have those great presentations from the other speakers. I do know that this meeting is for providing feedback to the HSR, and I knew going into this that Sheldon and Dennis would be answering most of the questions. But if anyone has any specific questions for the other speakers, definitely feel free to ask. But we'll move on and we'll have responses for those previous three questions.
Okay, for you experiencing the hate crimes, that's unfortunate. The thing I can comment on is the cameras are up and they're running.
I'm saying if the cameras don't do anything, the cameras have been there in place to watch and surveil racialized people, and sometimes will also involve the police, but I'm saying that doesn't work, and there is an actual...
They've just been turned on 2 days ago. We've just started using them now.
But I'm saying there isn't that, there needs to be training located for...
Sure, absolutely.
Protocol for a way for people to...
Anything to better the service I'm for. And also for the temperature on the buses, that depends on what model of bus you're talking about. Believe me, some of the buses we really can't control. If it's on, the heat's on. If it's cold, if it's for air conditioning, it's air conditioning. Can you imagine the bus driver that has to drive the bus all day, sweating his buckets and freezing in the... Some models are a little bit more equipped to deal with that kind of situation, but really, to be honest, it's simply a switch on or off. There's no regulation of any kind. So that's a technology thing, really. That's, yeah.
We're responding to the question.
Reiterating Sheldon's statement as well, in no way do we support hate crimes or anything even related that could be conceived as that. He did mention the cameras being turned on a few days ago. That is a fact. Anytime you have experienced something like that or have witnessed something like that, please call it in. Please let us look into it and deal with that appropriately. It's not accepted whatsoever. And then to the first speaker's comment, the the compliment about our accessibility. I'm definitely proud to say our conventional fleet is 100% accessible.
Okay, great.
The driver response isn't.
You can turn on your mic too, Lane. It's the red button. Yeah.
I have a question for you, Sheldon. In relation, and I know it seems a bit trivial, but temperature. One thing I've noticed, especially in winter, summer it's less of an issue, but often when you get to a stop, both doors open. And it's -10 outside, and if you're in the back, I mean, if it's open long enough, then the whole bus loses its heat. Is it normal that both doors need to be open? Because I see that as a kind of common practice. Is it a model question or something like that?
That's actually a great question. Again, it might depend on what bus it is. If it's an articulated bus, if I'm opening the back doors, both sets of back doors open, that's uncontrollable by the driver. And also, if it's a full bus, the driver's going to guess if people are leaving from the back or the front. So a lot of times, just to save time, they just open both doors and people exit as they can. But again, I agree, it's not great for the passengers or even the driver. How it's avoidable, if it's not a full bus, it's a lot easier. You can tell if someone's standing at the back door, just open the back door. But again, if it's packed to the yellow line, I have no idea which exit or possibly both. So it's a crapshoot on the driver, I'm guessing.
Right. I was just curious if there was a model question or, if there was a technical
I appreciate the question, no problem at all.
Thank you.
Just moving on, we're getting to the end of the night, so we're going to take 4 quick questions. I'm doing them in order I saw. We're going to go with 1, 2, 3, and then 4, and then this portion of the evening will have to come to a close. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry, we're going to go with the first-time speakers.
Thank you for holding this tonight. I really appreciate it. It's great to see everybody out. The first couple of things are comments. I've been very blessed. All the drivers I've ever encountered, I've been riding a long time, have been very kind and very good. And I don't know how the HSR allows them not to have bathroom breaks, even because there's construction in the city and stuff like that. How do you not allow it? Like that's just inhumane. That's my one comment. And the other comment is, there are some buses, like the 2016, 2015 buses. They're really crummy buses, I'm sorry. But I want to ask the HSR, do you ever ask your drivers when you choose the buses whether
So we're going to wait for answers, so hopefully you guys are keeping track. Ute was with the second question.
Can I?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Thanks. I'm not always as loud as I want to be. First, thanks again also, Ian, for organizing this in Environment Hamilton. What a great environmental organization we're blessed to have in this community. And so many communities don't have that. So I really encourage you to sign up and become a member of Environment Hamilton today. Good public transit is a public asset, and the current council is treating it like it's a drain, and that is the problem. We as citizens here also have a responsibility, not just HSR, though I think you guys are doing great and you're answering these questions and you're showing how much you care, and that's important. But we have councilors on council right now who don't understand the benefits of good public transit. We need to address who those councilors are within our community. We need to find out, challenge them, because they could become incumbents very soon. We need to challenge them and ask them what their answers are to these questions. And if they're not appropriate answers, we need to back up candidates who are going to respond to HSR as a public asset. And you can't sit here in these and say and show up for a meeting like this. It's not enough. You got to canvass for a good candidate. You got to go to their debates. You got to make sure they get interviewed in the newspapers. You got to pack them up with $1 donation if that's what you can contribute to their campaign. Because we had a councillor in Hamilton, and I'm not saying that this person doesn't agree with public transit, but we know they do. do not. This person got elected on 20% of the votes on the mountain, or maybe 21%. I might have my statistic off a little. 20% of the people on the mountain voted, and this person only had something like 17% of those votes. We as a citizen body are not showing up for elections, and this is what's happening when we are disinterested and disengaged. So you got to get out there, canvass, support candidates who are going to bring this to the attention of council and be the kind of councillors you want to see, and you got to get out and support with canvassing and inspire your neighbors to vote. This is what we have to do. Thank you.
So we just have 2 remaining questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. Also thank Don McLean for area rating. It's a real big issue for funding. I want to ask HSR management, it's my understanding that the information operators that answer the phone calls were laid off last Thursday. Considering what the HSR is going through, that kind of sounds like a very cynical decision. So I appreciate a comment from HSR management on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, going on to the last comment or question, right there with the, yeah.
I just wanted to reflect on a comment that was made by the MSU representatives, which is that they contribute a significant proportion towards the HSR budget. So thank you for your commitment to that. I often use many of the bus routes that also travel to the university. And I think it's unfortunate that we know that there are many routes that are not going to go out. It's not unusual to see 3 or 4 buses go by, not pick up students. And we know that there are articulating buses that are sitting at the garage that are not going out. So in terms of actual planning, I think it would be more responsible to ensure that we get individuals from point A to point B, so whether it's the students, whether it's individuals with mobility issues, that they're not left behind. And I think that kind of planning in the interim as like a larger solution as sought out would be beneficial. And for the drivers who are in those situations where they drive by individuals who are left at the stop, that really is detrimental to their morale as well. They hate driving by and leaving individuals behind. So I think that would help to foster improved relations when you go back to your comment about using HSR.
Okay, great. So that will be the last question for this portion of the evening. I'm going to allow folks to answer. I'm assuming Sheldon and Dennis want to respond. We'll start with Sheldon.
Oh, sorry. First, we're talking about growing transit. We need a robust transit, which I mentioned a couple of times. We need to improve it. And so it is, I would agree, stunning that we did just do some laying off during a time when we're trying to grow transit. That's a little bit mind-boggling. Also, we don't want to leave anybody behind. The comment there, we're human beings. Drivers don't want to leave people behind. When you actually see a bus that is so packed to the doors that it's having trouble closing, that's not a successful transit. That's a failing transit. No bus should be that full. No bus should be that full. We want to grow transit. I'm proud as an ATU here to be invited to this debate, to be talking about these issues. We need to move forward. Like, honestly, Binbrook, no service. I just mentioned Costco has no service. Waterdown, Riverdale is screaming. Riverdale is asking for service. They want it and they're not getting it. Caledonia is asking for it. And we're having troubles having our own routes being met right now. It's unbelievable. I'm also a driver, not just part of the union executive. I'm proud to work for the HSR. I'm proud to be a bus driver. This city deserves world-class transit because this is a great city. We have to stop talking about we're going to do the 10-year plan. We have to stop talking about the would-haves and should-haves, and let's start getting to the doing it.
Did you have a question?
Okay, I'll address a couple things. In response to the question about the information operators, I'm not at liberty to talk about the details to that, but what I can tell you is it's part of a larger corporate initiative to consolidate calls to a central call center. In relation to consulting with drivers on the buses we buy, The 2015 and 2016 predate me, but I do know, so I can't comment on whether or not we did for those ones, but I can say that on multiple occasions we have had different variations of seats brought in so that drivers could sit in the various ones available on the markets, since they're sitting in them for the most, well, all of their day, and get their comments on that so that we can order accordingly to the seats that they find most comfortable.
Tom, you had a point to make?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to the comment earlier about getting counselors on the bus. A couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, Environment Hamilton tried to encourage that with a little program that allowed people to vote with their dollars. The money went to buying tickets for low-income people, and it only went to them if the counselor actually rode on the bus. There were 16 people on council, 6 were willing to go out and ride the bus for a week. In that, we gave them a 3-month period, so that speaks pretty strong volumes. We have a whole lot of counselors who refuse to ride the HSR, and they should not be the decision makers for this system.
I think we're going to end on that. I really like that note to end on. And I do want to encourage, all of our panelists are going to be sticking around for a little while longer, so if you do have any concerns or questions, definitely come down. We're going to be moving into the foyer. I'm sorry to cut this off, but facility staff, I don't want to keep them too much longer, as it is unusual to have a public meeting here in City Hall like this. And I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight.
Come on.